Hi everyone, this is a Barclay Damon live broadcast where we discuss all things L&E, labor, and employment. I'm Ari, let's dig in. Hey guys, welcome back to Can I Ask That? This is our third episode in our 3-episode segment where we tell you what you need to know, what you can and can't ask in the context of job applications, job postings, and in the case of today, employee interviews. I am back with Scott Rogoff. If you've listened to our first 2 episodes in this segment, you've heard Scott and I go back and forth on a lot of issues as it relates to protected classes and permissible questions. So, it just made sense to have Scott back to talk about the interview process. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Sure. Thanks for having me. It's been fun.
Absolutely. So before we jump in, Scott is so interesting that I'm just making him give us something fun for every episode. So if you haven't listened to our first 2 episodes in this segment, I'll give you a refresher. Number 1, questionable driver. Number 2, local celebrity. Number 3, Scott, hit us with number 3.
So I hope it's a fun fact, but I used to sing and play acoustic guitar in a Jimmy Buffett cover band. This was 1991-ish. A good friend of mine who's been my best friend since 2nd grade started taking up the guitar, and I've been playing for a long time, but I'm not very good. And Jimmy Buffett music, for the most part, is no more than 3-4 simple chords, great lyrics, a lot of fun. And in Rochester, the music scene continues to be, and it's always been really, really, it's a great music scene, brilliant musicians. And I am not one of them, and nor is my partner. So we said, if we're going to do something, we need to find a different way to break in. So we said, let's just be fun. We're going to screw up the chords and mess up the words, and we did. But we got a little bit of a following, and I actually met my wife through one of our shows because she knew a friend of a friend, and she came, and thank goodness she was a Jimmy Buffett fan because I've now been married for 23 years.
Well, I do think that's interesting, Scott. And, I feel like all of your interesting facts about yourself are very, giving me summer vibes. Like you're in Hilton Head. You're just strumming on an acoustic guitar, just singing Jimmy Buffett.
It's funny. I should be wearing a straw hat and sandals or something. I mean, you're right. It's like I'm thinking of all these warm weather memories.
Yes, but I mean, it makes sense given what being in Western New York, upstate area. So, Thanks for sharing. I'm glad you did, and learned a lot about you the last few weeks, Scott.
Yeah, this has been very therapeutic for me too, Ari. I'd suppressed all these memories. Thank you.
Yes.
You're going to send me a bill now.
Well, thanks, Scott. Let's dig in. Today, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, we're going to talk about some tips for employers with respect to employee interviews. So let's leave behind job postings, applications. The first thing I wanted to talk with you about, Scott, is, whether you have some general pointers for employers, as they're preparing for interviews and, what tips you might have.
Yeah, definitely. So the overriding principle is take it seriously. Do not wing an interview. Very often employers will have 5, 6, 7, 8 of them in a day, and they're like, all right, bring the next one in. Let's just kind of do this, by repetition, by rote. And you got to be very, very careful. Every new person coming in comes with their own particular set of skills, and you want to make sure you are zeroed in and listening to that particular person. So you want to be prepared. So some of the things that we recommend you do is, let's say it's all the same position you're interviewing for, write out your questions, or at least write out the basic 5, 6, 7 questions that you want to ask, and ask those same questions of everybody. Because if it turns out you don't hire somebody and they think it's because of some protected class, and now you're involved in litigation or it's an agency charge, and the notes have to be disclosed, you don't want someone saying, well, gee, how come you only asked 2 questions of this person and you asked 20 questions of the other person, and the substance that you asked this person is not the same substance as other people. So you want to be as consistent as possible. I've got employers, in fact, I just reviewed one for one of our clients last week, who writes all the questions out. And I took a look at them. They make a lot of sense. They don't ask any of the bad questions that we've been talking about for the last 2 sessions,
Right.
which is very good. So you want to have that in front of you. Now, you don't want to be so wedded to a script that when they give you an answer, you ignore it and then you go boom, 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 right? You've got to
Right.
really listen. So to be a good interviewer, you've got to be a very good and active listener, because you're going to get nuggets that are going to open doors for other areas of questioning, that if you just go, thank you for answering question 1, question 2, question 3, and now you're done, it's not an effective interview, and you're not going to really learn a lot about someone. So be prepared, have your questions written out, take some notes, and make sure they're legible. My handwriting is horrible, so I have to work on that, but you definitely want to make it legible and be consistent. You also want to make sure that right off the bat, there aren't any accommodations that are needed. Now, usually the applicant will let you know that. I have a hearing deficiency, so maybe you want to have a sign language person or something along those lines. If someone is in a wheelchair, is mobility impaired, you want to make sure they have access to the interview room. A lot of
Yes.
this is being done by Zoom, so
Yes.
that kind of mitigates that. But I would certainly make sure that everything is cool there. Now, I don't think you have an obligation to ask the applicant, boy, is there any accommodation I can make for you to make I don't think you need to ask that, but you need to be aware of it. And if they do make a request, you have to be nimble and see if you can make that request. So that's kind of all the setup and preparation. And, it may be the last one at 4:30, but that applicant deserves the same attention that you give the first person at 9 o'clock. So, use the facilities, have a drink of water or coffee, spray some water on your face. But you got to be fair to every single applicant. And just because they're at the end of the day, that's not their fault. And you want
Yes.
to make sure you give them all the attention.
Yeah, and I'm really glad, Scott, you brought up, the issue of providing accommodations. If somebody who has a disability or something that is known to you, they make it known to you as it relates to, being able to equally participate in the interview process. Because I think with it being this remote format, a lot of telephone interviews, like, I'm working on a case right now that involves an interview for a hearing impaired applicant who, she's saying that she made our client aware that she was hearing impaired, and our client is saying, we were not made aware, we didn't know, and it's turned into a literal federal case. So I'm glad you brought that up, because, those things are really important to keep in mind as you prepare for the interview.
Yeah. Now, some of them will be obvious, but some won't. So just
Exactly.
be nimble and ready. And if somebody asks, now you may have to reschedule, right? Like if you don't have any idea and
Mm-hmm.
they say to you, oh, by the way, I can't see or I can't hear or whatever, I need this accommodation. You might have to say, listen, let me look into that for you, but I don't want to go forward today because I want you, like I like your phrasing, or you need to have the same opportunity that everybody else has. And if
Mm-hmm.
we need to make an accommodation, we're going to do that for you.
Right.
Now, obviously has some limitation. It still has that reasonableness standard. Well, I need my entire family to come in here and rub my shoulders because I have anxiety and say attaboy or attagirl. I mean, that's not reasonable.
Right.
But if it's something more reasonable, you may have to say, let's reschedule this for another day,
Right.
or we can provide you with that accommodation.
Right, like a relay service. So, like in the, like in the case of a hearing impaired individual, like maybe you
Yep.
need a little time to set that up if the applicant doesn't have access to that, like things like
Mm-hmm.
that.
Correct. Yep.
So, Scott, thanks. I think that's really helpful, for employers in looking or having an eye toward preparing for an interview. I wanted to get your take, as it relates to tips for during the interview process itself, and when you're an employer and you're actually interviewing an applicant, any tips that you might have under those circumstances.
Sure. I think you really want to zero in on the job. If you could close your eyes and say, our ideal candidate would have these skills, right? Or this kind of work ethic. You want to ask questions that will zero in on those particular aspects, right? Now, do you want to make a little bit of small talk in the beginning? Maybe, but you always got to be careful. Tell me a little bit about yourself. That's a dangerous question, because now, oh, I'm glad you asked because I'm a member of 7 different protected classes and I'm an advocate for blah, blah, blah. And now before you know anything about it, they've set you up. So I wouldn't ask those questions, right? Come in, thank you for being with us. I appreciate your interest in our company and in our job. Let me tell you a little bit more about this position, okay? And then now you're off, right? Or you may want to ask them, because I think, especially in this day and age of information, how easily accessible information is, let's see if they've done their homework. Tell me what you understand about this position.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me why you're looking for this particular position, and then you
Yes.
kind of get the dialogue going. So you do that. Obviously, skills are very important, and be careful of asking questions that's going to give them an easy answer. So let's say you say something like, "Well, we adopt a team-centered approach. So when we give assignments, we have people work as a team. Are you okay with that?" Who's going to say no? No, I'm not, right? So
Right.
I wouldn't ask that question. I would say, um, can you give me an example, perhaps from your previous employment, where you had to work as a team? How was that? Now it's an example, right? As opposed to I remember, I don't know, Ari, your experience applying for jobs, but I remember when I was right out of law school, I lived in Boston, and the job market was just ridiculous. So I probably went on 50 interviews, and no matter what area of law they practiced, I loved it. So why do you want to be a toxic tort lawyer? Oh,
Right.
because I'm very fast. And then the next day, the same day, why do you want to be a family law lawyer? Oh, because I'm
Right.
fascinated with. So they're going to tell you what you want to hear.
Yes.
It's harder to do that if you ask them for an example. A couple questions that I always ask is, let's say you've got some work history. I say, tell me about a time in your last job where you really nailed it. You hit the ball out of the park. What happened? And then conversely, tell me about a time at work where you really blew it. What did you learn? What happened? What did you do to fix it? Those questions force somebody to really get into what they did, and it doesn't give them the chance to say, I'm a team player, or boy, I accept criticism. Okay, well, give me an example of when that
Right.
happened. And I guarantee you, if someone says, I've never messed up, that's maybe not be the person that you want to hire, or the people who turn it, who go, I know this is really hiring thing, but it's just fresh in my mind. Tell me an example of a time you blew it. Well, I work so hard and I work so many hours, and I take on no. Everybody blew it at one point. So ask questions again that are designed to give them examples of what has actually happened. So that those are kind of the questions that I would ask, to elicit information about them, which is not going to give them the easy out. Sure, I love working with a team. Sure, I will work late hours. Sure, I will do that.
Yes.
Ask them for examples.
Yeah, those are great, Scott. I think that's great practical, advice. So I'm glad that you kind of shared your thoughts on that. And with respect to taking notes during the interview process, I think, we get this question. I would say, yeah, definitely take notes during the interview. I don't know if you have a different take or if there's anything specifically you advise our clients to look out for, but I would say yes.
I say yes as well, but the person needs to know what they're doing, right? You don't want to stick somebody in an interview room who is not familiar with the process and really doesn't have a lot of note-taking experience,
True.
because you want to write down facts.
Right.
You want to avoid opinions.
Yes.
Now, they may come later, right? But you don't want to say what a jerk this person is. Like, you don't want to write that down.
Yes.
But you may want to say, good answer to question, because you have question 3, give me a time you really hit the ball out of the park. Good answer described when they had a tight deadline. She put together a team and the client was satisfied, right? Boom, that's great. Now, after you're done, you may be in a room with other decision makers who say, Ari, tell me what you thought. Then go ahead. Well, I really didn't like this person. I
Yeah.
found them arrogant. I found them whatever. You don't really want to put that. Also, because that's so much tougher to defend if they don't get the job. Ari, how many times have we seen, from employers, well, they had a personality problem. I just didn't like them.
Yeah.
That's hard to show because it's subjective.
Subjective. Yep.
It really is. Whereas if you say, ask them for a time they really messed up and they gave me no answer at all.
That's
Or
an objective observation.
exactly, either they did or they didn't. Those are objective. Or tell me, our company deals with this particular, software system or product. I asked them if they had experience. They said no. And yet 3 other applicants said they were familiar and had used it successfully, right? So those are the types of notes that you want to take because they're directly related to the pinpoint questions that you're going to be asking. But you raise a great point, Ari. It's just like, when we do performance evaluations, they're
Mhm.
only or investigations, they're only as good as the note takers who are doing them. And I would say avoid putting any opinions in at that point, right?
Yes.
That will come later. But I wouldn't do that right then and there, because now you got a written record. Oh, well, they didn't like me. Obviously, they didn't like me because I disclose I'm a member of a protected class.
Exactly.
So stick,
Exactly.
stick to the facts that they repeat back to you.
Really important point, Scott. So I think, we spent the first two episodes of this segment kind of talking about what you can and can't ask in the context of job applications and job postings. But I think this is something we should hit, as we're talking about the interview process, because obviously this is a conversation as opposed to, writing a question on paper. And, one of the things we talked about a couple weeks ago was, residency, citizenship, those kinds of things. And, what we talked about as it relates to the application applies to interviews as well. But, I think there are some ways that it's easier in an interview to ask questions that can get to that same information. Like, do you have any ties to Rochester? Do you have any ties to
Right.
Buffalo? What
Mhm.
is your tie to Buffalo? I remember after law school, me and my husband moved. I moved back to Buffalo. My husband moved from the Albany area, and that was a question he got a lot when he was applying to firms in Buffalo. Like, what? Why are you coming to Buffalo? This was like back before Buffalo was like cool again. At least I think it's cool. I always have, but you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. So state is slightly different. People who we want to hire people who are hopefully going to stick around, right?
Exactly.
Particularly when, and then we're not talking about remote, at this point,
Yes, true.
because
Very true.
you can have, but let's get back to the typical, pre-COVID kind of thing, because I think we'll get there eventually. But hopefully we all come back to work in our offices.
Fingers crossed.
Right. So, but it's a great point. So let's say, one of the things that is important to you as an employer is, am I going to hire someone who's going to stick around? Right. They're not going to be flopping all over the place, different places. The question that you raise is great. What is it that you like about our city? What is it you like about our town? That's different than saying, well, where are you from originally, and why would you move from blank to blank?
Yes.
Because they could say, oh, well, originally I am from Honduras, or I'm from wherever, and now they've disclosed the national origin fact that you didn't need to know that. You didn't need to know. So you simply could have said, or you can look at a resume, because if it's out there, it's out there. I
Yes.
noticed that you went to school in Boston, and then you worked in New York City, and then you worked in Chicago. Our office is in North Tonawanda. Why, those are big cities. Why would you want to come to North Tonawanda? It's wonderful that I have family in North Tonawanda, so I can say that,
Yes.
right?
To our listeners, that is a suburb of Buffalo.
Yes. So why would you want to come to a smaller town like ours? Perfect. That's fine.
Yeah.
And obviously what you're looking for is, well, I have family here,
Yes.
or, my cousin runs a business here, and I think I can tap into what they do. So that's
Yes.
kind of what you're looking. So it's the same. You're going to get the same information, but one way, i.e., where are you from? Where's your family from? Could elicit information that could be problematic vis-a-vis discrimination. The other way is, what is it you like about our location?
Yes. I
You might
like
get the
that.
same information.
Yeah, I think that's really important, Scott. So, one of the things that, we touched on a little bit, I think, in our prior episodes, but I think this comes up a lot in employee interviews, you know, hobbies, organizations you're involved with, things that even could be on the resume. Are there any limitations to those types of questions, or, what would you recommend as it relates to that? And what we're really getting at is, New York's, as you mentioned, I think last week, recreational activities law, and, what is okay to ask, and, what information, what you can do with the information basically as an employer.
So I think the first question is, why are we asking the question in the first place, right?
Right.
Why do I need to know what hobbies you have? Now, sometimes you want to know, like I used to ask this question, what's not on your resume that you'd like us to know about?
Yeah.
Like, I used to ask that question.
Right.
I don't as often anymore, because I'm afraid of the answer, right? But look, let's be honest. If we're going to be working in a team environment, whether it's remotely or in person or whatever, what's the old saying? You don't have to like the person you work with, but you have to respect them and get along with them. It can be important to know. I do nothing. I go home. I go home. I make a frozen dinner, and I go to sleep, and I come to work the next day. well, geez, is that the kind of, are you going to add anything to our culture, our office culture? Are you going to add anything? So yeah, we may want to know those things, but I think it really depends on the job, right? Some positions, we don't care. So that may not matter, right? If there's a particular position. Others may, like as you know, our firm often adopts a team-based approach, and people are generally comfortable going office to office. Hey, Ari, if you're not busy, can I run something by you? Yeah, sure, no problem. Or can I pick up a 4-digit extension? Geez, I know that you handled something. Can I do that? So you may want to know about that. So you could certainly ask. Remember, I talked about asking for a specific example. Give me an example when you ask for help. Job related, of course.
Yes.
Then that might give them, that might lead to those sorts of things, and it'll give you an insight as to their work ethic and their work attitude. In terms of general hobbies, I guess see what their resume says. Sometimes people put special interests on there. So let's say golf. Okay, that might be safe. Tell me how often do you play? If we had a company golf outing, is that something you'd be interested in? Right? That might.
Jimmy Buffett cover band. Are you comfortable
Ooh,
playing at
yeah,
our
we do a
our
talent show,
company
right?
retreat? Yeah.
Exactly. So yeah. So I think again, you got to be nimble a little bit.
Yes.
If they put down as a hobby, I volunteer with the Center for Disability Rights. Okay. Interesting. Very valuable. That might lead to other issues. Well, because let's play it out. Geez, I see that you volunteer for this organization. What made you do that? Well, I have a disability myself, and my family has a disability, and I think that people are taken advantage of, and I need this. Again, all terrific. I mean, and so we understand, everybody. We're talking from a strictly legal
Yes.
standpoint. How to protect employers from potential claims, and that might be one. Now, you could say, I noticed that you do a lot of charitable activity. Our firm is involved in community service as well, and if we embark on something, is that something you'd be interested in? That might be a way to kind of address it without saying specifically, what are your hobbies and interests?
Yes.
So,
yeah. Thanks, Scott. That's a really good answer to the question I asked. So I think one of the things that something an employer may want to know, and I think is reasonable, in the context of an interview is, like, what's your availability? Are you available on Saturdays? Are you available on Sundays? And I'm sure it will come up. I have 2 kids. I'm not available on evenings, those kinds of things. So,
right.
What is your advice as it relates to the best way to kind of get that information from somebody? Because I think that is information, we say hobbies, why would that come up? It's a little more attenuated, but I think it's reasonable for an employer to want to know, can you work on the weekends? How do you, what's your advice for asking those types of questions? Because we don't want to implicate any type of, religious observance or,
Right.
If you're a caretaker, those types of questions.
I think you handle it the same way you handle disability, which here's the job description, here are the requirements of the position. Can you do this with or without a reasonable accommodation? You say these are the typical hours of the job. It's generally 9 to 5. However, if there's a big project you're going to be involved with, the position, and always zero in on the position. I probably should have gone back. Try not to say the position, right? The position requires the successful candidate, right?
Yes.
To work weekends sometimes. Would you be able to do that, right? The position requires off hours. I mean, especially any salary exempt employee position, rather, that you're hiring for. You're on the clock 24/7 if you're salary exempt. So you might say, the expectation is that you're going to be available for your colleagues and for management and the people who report to you from 9 to 5. That's the expectation. However, the nature of our business is such that sometimes you may have a call at 7. We have West Coast clients if we're on the East Coast.
Mm-hmm.
We have international clients. So every now and then you might have to take a phone call at 11 p.m. or 12. Are you going to be able to do that? So you always relate it back to the position. And I think, Ari, it's a great question. And I think it's something that employers don't do enough, because when it doesn't come up and now you are in that situation, and that creates problems because the person doesn't show up and they go, oh, well, I have such and such, or I have whatever. And when we go, well, you didn't tell us, they go, well, you didn't ask.
Yeah,
Well, but I
right.
said, no, but I did tell you what the hours were, and you didn't give any indication as to that would be a problem. So I would tie everything to the specific position and say, this is the expectation of the hours. Can you comply with this?
Yes. I think that's a really good way to deal with it, Scott. So I think, lastly, before we sign off for today, I wanted to ask you a question. And we kind of talked about this. It was sprinkled in our other episodes, but in the context of, an employee interview, what to do if you're in the interview and the employee volunteers protected information, which I think does, it definitely happens. And by volunteer, we mean, basically we've gone through these examples, but the employee says, yeah, I'm interested in this organization because I have a disability and this is my disability and that, blah, blah, blah. So what's your advice to employers for how to deal with those types of voluntary disclosures?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it happens all the time. Sometimes it's as overt as you described. Sometimes it's more subtle,
Yes.
where you ask the applicant a question, and they go, "I'm sorry, I didn't hear you. I have
Right.
a hearing problem." Now you're like, "Oh boy, what do I do now?" So I think, well, okay, let's take the second case, and then we'll go to the first one. The second one, I would say, "Oh, okay. Are you able to hear me now? I mean, are we okay?" And if they go, well, it's still okay. Is there, if we move a little closer, if, this is like an in-person thing. If it's on video or Zoom, say, well, can we try to toggle the volume thing a little bit? So you got to address it, right? You have to
Yes.
address it. But let's say it's more overt than that, like you said. Well, I'm interested because I know your organization works with the developmentally disabled community. I myself am disabled and my family is disabled. I think what you want to do is shift as soon as you can. But I think you want to remind the person that you're an equal opportunity employer. And you say, okay, but listen, since you raised it, I just want to remind you that we don't take any of that into consideration when we make our employment decisions.
Yes.
We evaluate people based on their skills. And if there is a disability, we see if there's an accommodation that can be made. But I want you to understand and rest assured that none of that will have any bearing on our decision. So you use disability. What if, let's use race or age, right? And they say, well, I'm interested because I know you do a lot of work in the blank race community. Okay. And I'm very interested in that. And I'm an advocate. And I think you should know that when you consider my application. Thank you very much. You need to know that we don't make employment decisions based on race or age or whatever. We have an EEO policy. I'm happy to share it with you. Thank you for telling me that. But it's very important that you understand we don't base our decisions on any of that. And then shift as soon as you can to something. Tell me a little bit more about this. My sister has
So
this.
don't ask follow-up questions about whatever.
No,
Just,
change the subject. So,
yeah.
so my sister has this great thing. My younger sister, at Thanksgiving, if my sister asks if anybody has any gum, to change the subject because she doesn't chew gum. So let's say something heated and my sister, anybody got any gum? That's our way of knowing we need to pivot. So if that comes up in your interview, ask about the gum, right? Or something else, right?
Right.
Quickly pivot. Now, if they continue along those lines, it's going to tell you something. Are they setting you up? Are they really interested or they just want to let you know? And I think you still maintain an even keel. Say, listen, I understand this. Say, listen, I want to be respectful to your time. And I do have some more questions that I'd like to ask. So can I move on to this area?
Right.
And then, so that's another way of saying you got any gum. Right?
Yeah, I think that's great, Scott, because, a lot of times if it's something somebody could be passionate about, like in the examples we've discussed. So directing the conversation could be a challenge.
Yeah. And I wish I could attribute it to one of my mentors who came up with that. I want to be respectful of your time.
Yeah.
That's shorthand way of saying, we got to get out of here. I don't have all day. Right. But please, no pride of ownership. Folks listening to this podcast, watching it, use that phrase. If you want to kind of get out, say, listen, I know we blocked 45 minutes or half an hour. I want to be respectful of your time. So I really do need to ask you these sorts of questions. Please, by all means, use that phrase. It's another way of saying, I don't want to hear that anymore.
Yes, I like it. And it really applies to other facets of life, I would say.
Oh God, now that I've said that, if any of our clients are listening to this and you hear me say I want to be respectful, I really am. Oh boy. All right, well,
No,
that's
I'm
how it
just
goes.
messing with you, Scott. No,
No,
I'm
I
just
know,
kidding.
me too. And those of you who may have worked with me or are, we love you and all the
Yes.
time, whatever you need, we're here for
Yes, yes.
you. Oh boy.
Scott, all
Yeah.
right. Well, thank you so much. I think this has been great. I think this is a really good practical advice for employee, or excuse me, applicant interviews. I just want to say thank you so much again for joining us for this segment. It's been awesome. I've really enjoyed talking to you. Is there anything else you want to kind of let our listeners know before we sign off?
No, I appreciate it. This is the first kind of interview podcast that I've actually done. I mean, I try to do some presentations and webinars, but this is the first format. So I want to thank you for putting me at ease. That
Yes.
was great. And really, the takeaway for those employers on the line is, again, there's a potential minefield out there, and you want to make sure that you're prepared for any interview. You take them all very, very seriously, and that you are prepared for these situations that may come up. And if you really don't know what's going on, please, by all means, seek legal counsel and walk through it before you make an employment decision. And I
Great
guess if
advice.
there's any applicants who are listening to the podcast, there's no hidden secrets. Try to understand that when you're being interviewed, the employer really wants to try to find whether you're a good fit. So the questions that they're going to be asking are going to be related to the job, and they want to make sure that this is going to be a win-win for both of you. I think there's words of wisdom here for those of you who are looking for jobs too. As you go into an interview, to give you an idea of what the employers are looking for. So hopefully that's helpful as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Scott. Really appreciate it. I think this has been a really good segment, really valuable information. And to our listeners, tune into our next segment where we will go through workplace policies, handbooks, everything you need to know about, workplace policies. And we're going to keep you updated on the ever evolving landscape that is New York law. So, Scott, thank you so much again. Have a great rest of your day. We'll talk soon. The Labor Employment Podcast is available on barclaydamon.com, YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Like, follow, share, and continue to listen. Thanks. This material is for informational purposes only and does not constitute legal advice or a legal opinion, and no attorney-client relationship has been established or implied. Thanks for listening.